All right, that is my cue. So ordinarily, Kristen does a beautiful great job of introducing me, but Kristen is unable to be with us today, so I'm on my own here. And welcome everybody. I'm going to just take right over. My name is David Irvine. For those of you who don't know me, it is a pleasure to be here again. Thank you so much. I know there's many demands on our time these days, and for you to take an hour of your time out of your busy schedule means a great deal to me, believe me. Here's how the format works. For those of you who are new to the webinar, I will talk for approximately 50 to 60 minutes. Usually it's borders on 60 minutes. And people are welcome to, obviously you can jump off at any time, but oftentimes people have to jump off after the hour. But we will stay on for another half an hour afterwards. So it's actually a 90-minute webinar if you can stay on. And I will turn off the recording and I turn off the slides and we just have a good dialogue. And I think many people will tell us that that's we're building quite a little community of people who come regularly, and many people in a Q&A question dialogue. And I'm not the smartest person on this call, and we get some wisdom from some other folks in the community. Some people will tell us that that's really the best part of the webinar, is being able to stay on after, if you have the time and can schedule that in. So I will proceed. We're going to talk about recharging leadership, redefining empathy and resilience in the workplace. For those of you who read my article this month, I try to tap in the article to be sort of the same theme. And what the article was related to was a person that I'm coaching currently, and he gave me permission to use his story, obviously. And he's a fairly respecting guy and a very caring person, but he had these expectations that he had of one of his team members. And we were talking about having to have the tough conversations. And I said, you've got to let your expectations be known, and, speak up and really be clear and be courageous about that. And he did. And what happened was it backfired on him, and the person that he was talking to, it ended up going, he ended up having him, his team member put a complaint into human resources and said that, he didn't feel safe around him, and the job expectations were such that he didn't feel safe, and he had to take a stress leave. And it really got me thinking. I don't know. I know there's always the other side of the story. I didn't get the whole story. I didn't have a chance to talk with this employee and what his experience was, but I began to think and reflect, have we gotten it out of balance? Have we been almost too caring to people? Have we rescued people too much and made it too easy for people? Particularly as we work in this dimension where we have a hybrid workplace, and we're trying to be flexible, we're trying to stay engaged. And I just ask us to reflect on some things. Now, here are my observations of leadership in this era. There's an unsettled and a volatile time in our world today. Leaders are under continual pressure to take care of their people and are exhausted. They're pulled in many, many directions. Leaders are increasingly expected to deal with the mental health issues of their team members, and yet the mental health issues in our society and workplace continue to seem to be on the rise. We still haven't moved the needle much in terms of employee engagement scores. So I would just ask you to reflect on this. Is this true in your world? Have I hit the mark here? Would you look at it any differently? Just reflect on that. These are some of my observations. They're very anecdotal, but they're some of my observations. And what they bring with those observations come some questions that I would like to address today in this webinar. Can we push people too hard? Can we care too much? How do we care without carrying? How do we ensure results while building a culture of respect and compassion? I have to have at least one typo on my slides just to make sure that you all know I'm human. How do we ensure results while building a culture of respect and compassion? And are we out of balance in some way? This is more of an inquiry for this next hour than it having definitive answers. But I'm going to ask us to reflect on that. And as usual, we're going to go on a little journey. And here's the three themes that we're going to focus on. I'm going to talk about understanding polarity management in the context of all of this. So many of you are familiar with polarity management. I'm going to bring polarity management in this context because I think it may be helpful to us in responding to this sense of being out of balance. I'm going to talk about reflections on our reality in the world and in the workplace. I'll be a little philosophical with you to reflect on where we're really at in the world today. And then I want to leave you some strategies for a renewed, integrated approach to caring leadership as we reframe resiliency and caring in the workplace in a way that's strengthening and empowering rather than enabling, and rather than ways that take care of people too much and exhaust people too much. So let's just talk about this whole notion of polarity management. I'm assuming there's people on this call that have an understanding of polarity management. My philosophy is an approach to leadership. You have to know as a leader today. It's one of the primary skills of leadership. And it's one of the ways, frankly, that I measure leaders is how well they're able to manage polarity. So it'll be a bit of a review for those of you who are familiar with polarity management. And for those of you who this is new for you, I hope that you'll find it stimulating and useful. So let me share with you, well, this quote is a great quote. Some problems are so complex that you have to be highly intelligent and well-informed just to be undecided about them. Okay, so
Dave,
this is, yes.
we lost your slides.
Oh dear.
Sorry to interrupt.
That's not good. Let's get back to the slides. I might have stopped sharing inadvertently. Thank you, Marg, for jumping in there. Are they back?
They're back. We're good.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So polarity management. So there's a quote here that I want to put up here. And it says, some problems are so complex that you have to be highly intelligent and well-informed just to be undecided about them. So this is what I mean by polarity management. Let me give you a very simple example, and then we'll apply it to this notion of people and results. So our bodies are very wise, and our bodies actually manage polarity every moment, every breath of our life. So let me ask you, what's better, inhaling or exhaling? Now, there's nobody here that's going to take sides with me and have an argument about that. Some could say, well, it's better to exhale. Some could say it's better to inhale. But when you're managing polarity, what you do is that you see the benefit and the downside to each, and you integrate it into the benefit and the downside to the other side. For example, when you exhale, you're cleaning out, that's the benefit. You're cleaning out carbon dioxide. When you exhale, though, that if you clean out too much carbon dioxide, then you have a lack of oxygen, in which case you need to inhale to receive fresh oxygen. But when you receive fresh oxygen, you need to clean out the carbon dioxide. This is the continual act of your body managing polarity. And it actually manages polarity. You could do this with every cell in your body. Every organ in your body is doing this all the time. Now, what does this have to do with leadership? Well, let's take an example in leadership that's very common. I work in the safety world, and I'm actually doing some consulting right now with a manufacturing plant. And every organization that runs any kind of risk management understands that you have to manage two polarities. You have to manage safety and you have to manage profitability. Now, if you want 100% safety in an organization, what you do is shut the plant down and send everybody home and sell the company. That way you'll guarantee that everybody will be safe. But if you do that, you're not going to have a company to go to the next day. But at the same time, if you're only profitable and you're not safe and you end up killing people, you're not going to have a company either. So the benefit to profitability, of course, is that you have financial success. The downside is that you get a toxic work environment if that's all you care about, and you get a very unsafe workplace. The benefit to safety is everybody is guaranteed to go home uninjured if you only work with safety, but the downside is there's no company to work in tomorrow. I've seen CEOs who will stand up in their plant and say, we're going to be #1 in safety. And I'll take that CEO aside and say, be very careful when you say that. I would not suggest that you be #1 in safety, because it's going to cost you. It's going to cost you resources and money. Now, you have to put some money into safety, but is that the right goal to be #1? because you better have a lot of a deep pocket. Now, if you're a large company and you have a large pocket of finances, then you might be able to set that as a goal. But if you're not, then you have to manage that. And maybe number one in safety isn't the right goal, but you are safe enough where people don't feel a sense of high degree of risk. But what we call that is risk management. Somewhere in there, you have to be safe and you have to make money. And so this is what polarity management is. And if you're managing an organization that requires profitability and safety, you have to be a risk manager if you're leading a team or building an organization, running a company like this. So what leadership is it's both and you have to be able to integrate both of those together. Now, I'm not going to get political in here except for one moment, is that I want to look at the leader at the other side of the border. I will never call Trump a leader. And here's why. This is taking his policies aside. Whether you agree with his policies, let's just set that aside. In order to be a leader, you have to be able to, in my mind, to be able to integrate two polarities. Right now, he's on one side of a polarity. And the other is and there's a large faction of the country that's on the other side of that polarity, and he's dividing the world, much less the country. And so he's not able to do that. He's not able to integrate those two together. Now, if you give someone positional power and you give them one end of a spectrum, what we call that is dictate, not a leader, a dictator. Now, I'm not talking about a politician that knows how to have what we call a forked tongue. There's a difference between a politician and a leader. Some politicians, although I haven't met a lot of them that are real leaders, but there are politicians who are leaders. But being a leader is different than being a politician. A politician might speak with a forked tongue, as we say, and can appease people on the left and can appease people on the right and can speak to both of these. But that's not integrated leadership. That's not managing polarities. That's just appeasing both. You're not integrating them together. And a real leader knows how to integrate them together. And I'm going to teach you a little process, share with you a little process for how you can build integrated polarity management on whether you're managing a team or an organization or a family. Now, I wrote this book on Caring is Everything. Many of you have seen this book. I'm passionate about caring, and I've done a lot of thinking about caring. I used to think, by the way, you had to know something to write a book about it. This is how I learn, is that I write a book about it. I want to learn about caring, so I wrote a book about it, and I've done a lot of thinking about what does it really mean to be a caring person. And it comes down to this. What I've come up with is this sense of empowered caring. So it takes two things to really care about people. Number one, by the way, this is fundamental in leadership in our home. It's fundamental in leadership in our organizations. You have to support people, but you have to also push people. And this is polarity management. How do we do both? Now, you can say, well, they're opposite. If I'm supporting, I can't push. And if I'm pushing, I can't support. Well, how we manage this together through a polarity way through polarity management is to do it through what I call empowered caring. For example, if we push people too hard in our families or our workplaces, and we demand that they do things without supporting them, we build resentment, we build compliance if we have positional power and can keep them there, and then eventually we'll breed disengagement. On the other hand, if we support too much, we build entitlement, we build anxiety because people don't feel like they build the resources to know how to deal with life. We build exhaustion because it's too hard to work. And then we ultimately get the same thing that we get in too much demand. We get resentment and disengagement. So well, how can you resent somebody that supports you? And here's my observation. Having been a family therapist for many years, I've made an observation that the people who it's a strange observation, but the kids who get the most from their parents, who are given to the most, are the ones who tend to be the most angry at their parents. And if there's anybody here that knows somebody who has a 30-year-old living with their parents still, I can tell you they're not happy in that situation. They're not happy. There'd be some resentment going on against their parents. Because when we get looked after and get too much, we get the same result. It's the opposite side of the same coin. What we get is if we care too much and we go too much on that polarity, which is, I'm wondering if that's what's happened in our organizations today. We have what we call a coddle culture, coddling, rescuing, making it comfortable or easy, lowering your standards, trying to make people happy. I've learned this in my life. Nobody takes pride in doing something that's easy, okay? If you get a polarity management with children, for example, and because where do we get our philosophy from is in our families and our upbringings. And this is what we're bringing into our workplaces. So I just have a couple of examples to show you how and again, I'm being a bit philosophical here before I get to the practical, but I just want you to reflect on where we've come in terms of child rearing practices in the last generation or two. My mother was riding a horse when she was 1.5 years old. She got on that horse and was given the reins, and she was just expected to do it. And when she was 6 years old, she rode that horse 6 miles to school. Now, it wasn't uphill both ways, but I was at her own old homestead, and she rode that horse 6 miles to school. And in grade 1, and by the way, it was across a railroad track. Now you watch the busiest time in our communities across this country is at about 8:15 in the morning in front of an elementary school. I've watched parents drive their kids around. Now, this is not a parenting workshop, I get it, but this is the philosophy that we're reading in our society. And I get it, we don't want our kids to be in any kind of danger. We'll leave them unsupervised on the internet. I think we've undersupervised on in the internet and oversupervised in the public. But I digress. My mother got strapped on her first day of school. Now, how was that responded to when she got home? It was a one-room schoolhouse, 1928. Do you think her dad got on the horse and rode 6 miles into school for a parent-teacher interview? No. My mother never told a soul. Now, that's too much on the demand side. And many of us were raised with too much demands. But what was the benefit of too many demands is she was very, very self-reliant. She learned self-reliance. Nobody was going to feel sorry for her. She did not feel a sense of entitlement, and she had a sense of personal responsibility. But again, it was out of balance. Well, what's happened today? I'm going to show you, if you were born before 1970, this was the playground that you played on. This was the playground. These were the playgrounds that I played on. Now, just watch. You walked home with broken bones. These were not easy playgrounds. Now, again, I don't want to go back to the old days. I don't want to have playgrounds like this for our kids. But it's in terms of a polarity, notice the end of the spectrum. Notice what we did when we fell off those merry-go-rounds. We walked home with bruises and broken bones. But you know what you learn? You learn to manage your own risk. You learn some things about self-reliance. You learned about how to deal with the bully. Nobody was there to rescue you. We had to deal with it. Now, in some ways, you could say we don't want to go back there because, again, likely too much demand. I know we don't want to build climbing apparatuses like that. Well, I don't think we want to slide like this anymore, to have in our neighborhoods. But what's happened is I've noticed what kind of slides and what kind of playgrounds are in our schools today. There's no risk in these playgrounds. We live in a lawsuit society, and we're going to make it so safe that children will not learn. Now, again, what's the advantage? What's the benefit of these kind of playgrounds? Well, it's a safe place to play. At the same time, what's the downside to it is that we're not learning how to deal with some of the real problems that happened in my day when you had to deal with stuff in the playground. I mean, you learned a lot in the playground. You negotiated, you learned how to navigate risks. There was a lot you learned informally. I remember more what I learned in the playground probably than what I learned in most of my classes. That learning has now been taken away. So this is what we have to struggle with. This is, the interesting thing for me is this, that what's the benefit of what you notice here? There's a lot of parent supervision. Now, the good side to that is look at the fathers that are involved. I think fathers in this generation are more involved than dads were in any other generation with their kids. It's beautiful. And what's the downside to it from a polarity perspective? What's the downside to it? Maybe we have taken away, and I'm not blaming dads for this, I'm just saying we're all involved with our kids. It's wonderful to see parents and grandparents involved with their kids. I've taken my own grandkids to playgrounds, right? But what's the downside? If it's over supervised, we miss an opportunity to teach kids to deal with their own problems. We're always running in and doing it for them, right? There's a great book that I would recommend if there's any parents on here that have young kids that want to shift some of our thinking about raising kids. It's called Free Range Kids: How to Raise Safe, Self-Reliant Children. Now, the author has, I love the title, has put a subtitle in here that speaks to polarity management with children. In other words, we got to make it safe and we have to teach self-reliance. This is polarity management in its finest. There's another book that I love. There's actually nothing really new in this book. It's basically a book on stress management. It was written several years ago. Why zebras don't, but I just love the title, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. The notion is that zebras are around lions all the time, but they don't get anxious. Now, I don't know whether there's too many vets that have actually done tests with zebras in the wild, but I'm not imagining that they get stressed, but they are around lions. How does that happen? Well, first thing that happens is nobody feels sorry for these young zebras. They have 1 hour to rest after birth. And then mama zebra says, lions are coming. We got to run. You got to learn to run. You got to get on there. So there's this notion of strength from within. Many of you have seen my slide on this. It's been said that a bird sitting on a branch, never afraid of the branch breaking, it's because their trust is not in the branch, but in their wings. We have spent too much in this time in this generation, in my observation, trying to make the branch strong, and we haven't developed strong wings. And this is the result of this. You're going to get anxiety because you send this bird out into the wild and they haven't developed strong wings. They're going to get anxious if they've had too much security from that branch. Storms make trees take deeper roots. Dolly Parton. I love this quote. Hard times create strong people. Strong people create good times. Good times create weak people, and weak people create hard times. It's an interesting thought. This came from actually my financial advisor sent me this little quote this week. Comfort is the worst addiction and is a cheap ticket to depression. It's an interesting notion. All right. So what is caring then? Caring is expressing empathy and tuning into people. It's showing genuine concern. It's maintaining high standards. It's seeking to understand needs and barriers, and it's supporting people to achieve their results. It's not being their therapist in the workplace, but it's supporting people to achieve results. It's empowering people, and it moves you from a parenting to a partnering relationship. Now, what does all this philosophy have to do with leadership? What does it all have to do with leadership? Here's what I'm going to propose today, that integrated between people and results are what I call a get-her-done approach to leadership. And I want you to just stop and reflect in your own life. When have you ever worked on a team, or it might have been a sports team? It might have been a musical theater production when you needed a team to achieve a result. It may be a work team, some team that you've worked on in your life. And that team got together and said, we're going to get her done. And it really wasn't about the people. It was about the vision. It was about achieving the goal. But we worked together so well that we connected to each other and that we built a team together, and we really actually cared about each other without ever having to say that we care about each other. We didn't have to separate the caring from the results because it was all integrated together. And I'll bet that every one of us on this call has some kind of a model, a template of which that happened, where we cared about people. That was a given. And we also focused on the goal, which is the purpose of organizations really isn't to care about people. That was a pretty risky statement I made in my article, because for those of you who know me, you know how much I care. But the whole point is, the point of an organization is not to care about people. And let's not get mistaken that we're here to take care of you. No, we're here to create results. And let's find a way to create those results in a way that gets people engaged and gets this, for want of a better word, a get her done approach to leadership. So how do we create that? And that's what I want to spend the last half an hour talking about. And I'm going to talk about what I call the conditions for a get her done culture. And take any of those conditions. And by the way, it would be a great brainstorming exercise for each of you. You're welcome to borrow my conditions, but I would love you to sit with your teams and list with your teams, what would we call the conditions for a get her done culture in our team, in our family? What would those conditions be? And let the team, the wisdom of the team, create those conditions, and then say, how will we work together? What agreements will we make to each other that will ensure that those conditions are met? So I'm just going to go through them. There's 7 conditions that I have. Get her done, hire get her done people, a compelling vision, authentic alignment, a parenting to partnering shift, support requirements, a personal strength building system, and a shared love for the work. You know, we've gotten away from loving work. Work is work. That's why we call it work. It's work. It's hard sometimes, but how can we love it? So I'm just going to go through these one at a time over the next half an hour, and we'll reflect on these. And what I might ask you to do is to say, where's some of the missing component on your own team? And we'll have a good dialogue about it when I'm finished here. All right, let's talk about hiring get her done people. I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to be really personal about this. We got a team member on this call today who's a get her done person. And that's our Vice President of Client Care, Marg Barr. Now, I'm going to tell you about her get her done attitude. I don't know that I hired her intentionally because of her get her done attitude. I think intuitively I knew this. So Marg and I have a call once a week. And it's to coordinate she lives in Edmonton. I live just outside of Calgary. And we coordinate our efforts. Her skill and unique ability, she knows how to take care of people. She knows how to take care of details. And she knows how to represent me well when a client calls, because she was a former client. And she knows how to get her done. But she also has an attitude of getting her done. So we spend between 30 and 60 minutes a week coordinating our efforts, planning our week, planning our priorities, catching me up. She has questions for me. I have questions for her. We just have this dialogue goes on. At the end of our call this week, Marg opened up with some personal things that were going on in her life, that she was dealing with in her own life, and that had to do with some loss that she was going through. And we took a few minutes, and I don't know how supportive I was of the feelings that she was going through. It was very personal for her. I don't know how supportive I was, because I needed, I sometimes over, as much as I talk about caring, I can very much, when I'm under some pressure, I can move toward results and not care about people. So I hope she felt cared about. But here's the point of my story. She didn't lead with that. We didn't spend an hour talking about her, whatever she was going through at a personal level. Yes, there was a sensitivity to it. Yes, there was an importance. And I'm so glad that she felt safe enough with me to open that up with me. However, the focus was on the job. And she actually said, I said, gosh, I feel bad. We should have talked about your personal stuff beforehand. And she's a get her done person, because she said, no, I'm kind of glad that we got the work done first, because that was actually good therapy for me. I needed to put that aside and get the work done. And that's the kind of strong person that we want on our team. I'm married to a get her done person. In fact, I sometimes complain more than the 2 women that I work with on our team. Val's a get her done. Anybody that knows Val knows she will not complain. She never has a bad day. She just chooses to have a good day. and she's a get her done person. There's people on this call that I know personally that are get her done people. Don Campbell, I know you. I see you're on this call. You're a get her done person. You know, you might be having a bad day, but you're not going to have anybody feel sorry for you. Now, I'm not saying, again, this is not about denying your feelings. It's not about denying the fact that you have some difficulty in your life and that you can have a bad day and that you can bring that to your work for a few minutes to connect people to what's really going on. And it doesn't mean that you don't wander around as a leader and find out how people are doing personally. But again, it's both and. It's caring about people, but putting the focus on, you know what, we're here at work because it's good therapy. Let's get on with the job. So how do you hire get her done people? In your hiring process, in your promotion process, how would you identify? How do we know who's a get her done person? What's been their experience? It's a great question to ask in a hiring process. What do you know about get her done? What have you, tell me what's your experience in your life around getting her done and putting your own self-interest aside for the sake of the team, sometimes temporarily, not permanently, but for temporarily sake. Okay. All right. So that's the first thing. You got to get the right people on the bus. I don't know. I'll just go back to that point. I don't quite know how to teach somebody to be a get her done person. What I can do is foster that. It's like can you really teach leadership if it's not in you? You can foster it. You can build it. You can create an environment that makes it hard not to be that. But I would suggest you put that on your radar on your team and develop a team charter around, hey, what will we expect from each other to get her done? Now, may you come up with your own words. That's just my words. You're welcome to borrow it. But that's the attitude that gets to this notion of integrating people and results. All right. Number two, you got to have a compelling vision. You got to have a reason. If people aren't accountable and they aren't engaged, they don't have a reason. And a vision is what gives you a reason. Now, if we had more time, we'd spend, how do you actually develop that compelling vision? I'll spend just a minute on it. But this quote, if you want to build a ship, don't drum up people to collect wood and don't assign them to tasks and work, but rather inspire them to long for the endless immensity of the sea. What is the vision that we're working for? Every one of you, if you think back on those teams, whether it's a sports team, whether it's a musical theater team, whether it's a community team, whether it's a team at work, you all were working toward a common vision. You can't have a get her done attitude if you don't have a goal that inspires people. So the first job is to say, why are we doing this? Really understand your own personal why. What's your own personal mission? Why do you get out of bed in the morning? Number one reason I hear people get out of bed in the morning is to pee. Well, you got to go beyond that. It's a good place to start. But what gets you up early? What's your own personal mission? What's your own personal purpose in your life? And that you got to bring that to work. If you're not inspired by your own personal vision, it's going to be you can't give what you don't have. You can't build that within your team. All right. And again, if we had longer time, when I had more time, we'd spend actually clarifying what is that vision. But if you don't have a clear vision, well, what's your reason for coming? Well, I just come into just doing time. And I remember doing an employee engagement interview. I wandered around and was just having conversations with people. And there was this guy with a screensaver with a number on it. And I said, what's with the number on your screensaver? And he says, oh, that's how many days I have left till retirement. Now, maybe that's not such a bad thing, but the guy had like 4,000 days left and he's counting the days. So on Monday, he gets 2 days knocked off. Well, there's a person who does not have a vision. How can he possibly have a get her done attitude when you don't have a reason for even being there? You know, I've done work in the prison systems over the years, and I'll tell you what prisoners talk about at the break when they're eating together is how many years you got, how many years you got left, how many years you got left. Folks, don't turn your workplace into a prison, which means working without a vision, without a goal of why we're doing this. All right, enough said about that. Authentic alignment. Folks, we must select the illusion which appeals to our temperament and embrace it with passion if we want to be happy. What we're talking about here is finding our sweet spot, finding our authentic alignment. And this is really what engages people and gets people accountable. Howard Thurman, the the great theologian who inspired Martin Luther King, don't ask what the world needs, ask what makes you come alive, because what the world needs is for you to come alive. Staying busy keeps us estranged from our essential authentic self. Those of you who know in my longer programs know that my purpose is to connect people to their authentic self. And when we're estranged from ourselves, we stop asking ourselves if we're doing the right work. Are we actually doing our true work? Are we performing tasks or pursuing vocations that are good for our souls and therefore good for society? Where are you at personally? And if you really want to care about people, spend time getting them aligned with their values, with what their inner purpose is. Now, most of you have seen this slide that I've shown. If you've sat through any of my presentations before, this is your ikigai, your sweet spot, your reason for being, your gifts aligned with your passion, aligned with your contribution. I can tell you Marg is aligned with her gifts. She takes care of clients. She sells my work. She sells the value of my work. She takes care of details. She meticulously looks. If there's anybody here who's had to deal with, they deal with Marg. No, don't have to deal with Marg. Well, you kind of have to deal with Marg to work with us. But if there's anybody that's dealt with Marg, you know the meticulous care that she puts into her work. What she doesn't do well is goes out and cold calls. And she's much like me. We're not cold callers. And if I put Marg in a position of saying, you got to go out and make 30 cold calls a month, and we're going to drum up work, and we're going to get you getting me finding work, I would absolutely burn her out, because she's not in her wheelhouse doing that. It's not her skill set. It's not my skill set. So know what your skill set is. You can't possibly get a getter done attitude if you're not working within your skill set. As we say, fit people, don't fix people. We've spent far too much time trying to identify people's weaknesses and strengthen their weaknesses. It's not a good investment of your time. Find people's strengths, and then align your work with your strengths and your passions. As we say, alignment drives engagement and results. So again, this is the way you care about people, is not just listening to all their problems, listening to all their woes. And I'm not diminishing that. But it's not being a therapist to people. It's not being a counselor to people. It's really taking the time to understand what are their gifts and making sure there's a fit here. Most of us have never had a leader, much less the time in our life, to actually sit down and look at our gifts. We always look at what we did wrong. This gets ingrained in us from early on. How many of you ever had a report card you brought home, you got 5 B's and an F? What would get focused on? We always focus on the F, and maybe the F just isn't our strength. Doesn't mean we don't take the class and improve that maybe to a D or a C, but maybe our strength lies in one of those B's that we could take to an A and foster that, okay? This is just actually an excuse to introduce you to my granddaughter. But our birth, Wordsworth, is a forgetting, the soul that rises with us. Our life's star hath had elsewhere its setting, and cometh from afar. Not in entire forgetfulness, and not in utter nakedness, but trailing clouds of glory do we come from God, who is our home. Folks, anybody here has been around more than one child in a family, either as a niece, a nephew, your son or daughter, understands we are not born as blank slates. We are born with a destiny, and work is a wonderful tool for us to express that destiny in part. Now, maybe our destiny is away from work. We call that an avocation. If our destiny is in our work, we call that a vocation. But work is a tool to create that. And that's how you get people engaged, is by aligning their destiny to their work. Now, having said that, this is another slide that I want to show you. This is a paraphrase from Abraham Maslow. A musician must make music, an artist must paint, a poet must write, a teacher must teach, a leader must lead, an architect must design if they're ultimately to be at peace with themselves. What is it that you must do? Paint, write, teach, build, caretake, drive, sing, dance, design, coach, an apostle for peace, overthrow the order of ignorance and injustice in the world. What must you do to be at peace with yourself? And and this is something that you could take your team through a little exercise, or give them some work on this, and care enough to invest in this with your team, to say, what is it that you have to do in order to come alive at the end of the day? These are the children in my life, my daughters, my 3 daughters, my granddaughter, and my grandson. And they each have found their way in the world. They each have found and launched their place. They have found their way. And each of them, and this is what brings me deep, deep satisfaction as a parent. My grandkids are not quite there yet, but this is what brings me deep satisfaction when I see my daughter, who is a performing artist in the top left-hand corner, find performing art and teaching her kids. And now she's a parent, a stay-at-home mom, working with finding this with Juno. And then she also directs a play and takes her theatrical skills and uses as a tool to change the lives of high school students. My oldest daughter, who's a potter, a creator. My youngest daughter, who has found her place in the police force. So each of them have found their way through work is for them, their passion. Now, I want to say this, is that you can map your authentic alignment with energy. And so I've drawn this little graph, and this is, again, something that you can offer, and you're welcome to borrow any of these tools with your team. This is short-term satisfaction and long-term fulfillment. And this is, if you map these out, it's stimulating. It's stimulating short-term satisfaction, but it's not meaningful long-term. Slogging is when it's not. It doesn't give you much happiness, and it doesn't give you much meaning, but you got to roll up your sleeves and get the job done. Sacrificing. That's my dad's generation. I remember asking my dad once, did you like your work? And he looked at me like I had beans for brains. He said, what does liking your job have to do anything? My job is, and I could get very emotional about this, but my dad said, my job is to save up enough money to pay for your undergraduate education. That's my job. And that was long-term meaning, but it was called sacrifice. And this generation has much to learn about sacrifice, because we think if it's not stimulating, we're not going to embark in it. And then sweet spot. So what is a fulfilling career? What's a fulfilling job? What will sustain you is when you go through all of these seasons. There's not one right way. I don't know anybody that spends 100% of their time in their sweet spot. Sometimes, folks, you know what? You just got to roll up your sleeves and slog. And that's part of getting her done, because you know you're going to cycle soon into the sweet spot. So my general rule is, if you have 25% of your time in each of those seasons, that's a sustaining workplace. And I would map this out with people, with your teams, with yourself first, and say, what percentage of your time is in each of those 4 areas? And, if you're always sacrificing, you're going to get depleted. If you're always slogging, you're going to get depleted. But that's comes with the work, is all 4 of those seasons. Okay. Parenting to partnering. I'm actually going to spend more time on that in my next webinar next month. Actually, we're going to dive more deeply into my whole philosophy of accountability. But basically, folks, the parental contract, there's a parent to parent, adult to adult, child to child. We have historically, folks, run organizations like we've treated them like kids. We've had parent-child relationship. All of our systems historically have been very parent-child. You play nice and we'll take care of you. And that outdated parental employment contract says, if you do what you're told, listen to your supervisor. And by the way, the whole notion of supervisors, I get it, it's a position, but how many of us really want to be supervised? It's an outdated model. Even if you use the word supervisor, are you really supervising, or are you supporting? Are you serving? Are you supporting people to get their job done? Score high on your performance evaluation. This whole notion of grading people is an outdated parental model. when do we get graded? We get graded when we're kids. We get evaluated by adults, big adults in our life. And what right do we have to evaluate anybody with a number in our life? By the way, any system that you're using in your organization, just take it home and use it with your significant other and see how it works. Go home and grade your partner and to see how that relationship works and see how that ends. If you wouldn't do it with a significant other in your life, folks, why would we do it with each other? What right do we have to evaluate versus sitting and giving each other feedback? Be available 24/7. Do your job plus somebody else's. Then we'll give you job security until we can't, a competitive salary and benefits, an evaluation of how pleased we are, promotional opportunity, and we'll give you a good culture. It's a parental model. And so how do we change that? We change it through direct feedback with each other, honest feedback. We hold each other accountable. I'm not holding you accountable. There's some promises that I have to you. There's promises you have to me. How will we work together to hold each other accountable to those promises? Okay. So again, how do we turn this into you still have a role as a positional leader as a last resort. Sometimes you have, as a last resort, sometimes you have to say, you know what, I'm the boss and this has to get done. But that's a last resort. In the meantime, let's build with each other. Let's set goals together and let's work together as partners rather than as parents. And again, I could get into this in much more detail. I'm going to leave it for now, but we're going to get into this much more next month. Support requirements. Basically, what that means is any expectation that you have of another person, they have an expectation of you. And this actually builds on number 4 in terms of support requirements. So anytime that you have an expectation from someone, make sure that you're clear about what that expectation is. And by the way, that's a big part of a get her done culture, is to know what those expectations are. I actually could have added that point. But know what those expectations are, but I don't just expect it from you. There's expectations you have from me. And this is what locks us together in a good agreement process. Number 6 is a personal strength building system. Folks, many of you have heard my statement of this quote. This is the law of the wolf pack. The law of the wolf pack is old and as true as the sky. And the wolf that shall keep it will prosper, but the wolf that shall break it must die. As the creeper that girdles the tree trunk, the law runneth forward and back. For the strength of the pack is the wolf, and the strength of the wolf is the pack. What makes a strong pack, folks, is strong wolves. What makes strong wolves is a strong pack. But it behoves each of us to have what I call a strength building system. Are we bringing strength to the pack? We need strong people today. So what does that mean? We need what I call a self-renewal process, a strength building system. And many of you have heard me talk about this, but I've had to learn this from dealing with my own mental health challenges. I have to take responsibility for my mental health. I can't depend on my clients to take care of my mental health. I can't depend on, if I was working for an organization, I would not depend on that organization to take care of my well-being. It's not the job of an organization or a company to take care of your well-being, your self-renewal. We have to take responsibility for that on our own. Now, we all need, in my mind, I would encourage you to come up with a mental fitness program. In this day and age, it's not easy to have good, strong mental health, especially when we've lived with maybe too much support and too much comfort in our lives. But what would your version of a mental fitness program be? What would inspire you and strengthen you and renew you on a consistent basis? What are the non-negotiables in your life that you take care of yourself? Now, I will share with you very briefly, again, we're not going to get into this in much detail. I'll share with you very briefly what my own mental fitness program is that I've had to design for myself. But mine program, you're welcome to borrow some of my program, but we all have to come up with our own to make it authentic. First of all, I think we all need a practice. My bias, and I'll just speak for myself here. I've learned that I have to have a practice away from the darkness of the world that offers, sometimes I call it prayer, quiet time, meditation, whatever you want to call it, but it offers a ballast in the storms, something that's solid and unchanging in the changing of life, of our life, and the fluctuations of our world. a community that I reach out to pretty on a day-to-day basis, on a daily basis. I have to be relentless about how much rest I get, a process for healing my past, a regular exercise program. I think most of the reason I exercise physically today, I go to the gym because it's good for me mentally. I'm relentless. One of my non-negotiables is taking care of my, because I know there are certain kinds of food that throw fuel on my depression. And if I have to abstain from certain things. Just because things taste good, folks, doesn't mean they're good for you. I spend time every day in nature. There's always a dog for me. And this is really my emotional support dog here. A diversified identity. I got to make sure that I have more of an identity than, I have an identity for this guy that does these webinars every month and that comes out and speaks to organizations. But I have to have a broader identity. That's why I have personal relationships, because they love me for who I am and not for what I do and how smart I am. Kids are really good that way. Buffers and boundaries. I have to make sure during the day that there's spaces in my day, that I don't just race through the day. I have to take care of my well-being by having spaces and boundaries that are important to me. And sometimes it's not easy to set those boundaries. Okay. All right. Consistency over intensity. This is my philosophy in life. I do small things consistently. It looks like those might be a lot of things. They're done imperfectly, but they're done consistently with imperfection. Okay. And my final point here that I want to leave us all with is a shared love for work. I'm a student of Gahil Gibran. He wrote a book called The Prophet more than 100 years ago. And in that book, he's got different topics where he says, speak to us of love, speak to us of marriage. And in there, he has a chapter called Speak to Us of Work. And I want to read you a portion of that. And I want you to allow yourself to let this settle in. How can we learn to love our work? And I think the reason we've gotten away from loving our work is because we don't see our life calling in our work. It just becomes a job rather than real work. And sometimes our real work, we don't even get paid for. And that's fine. But what is your work? What is your work? And what if we could, my vision would be that we could create workplaces where people actually love the work. They love the environment, but the environment was a tool for people to really engage and find value in their work. Then a plowman said, speak to us of work. And he answered, saying, you work that you may keep pace with the earth and the soul of the earth. For to be idle is to become a stranger unto the seasons, and to step out of life's possession, which marches in majesty and proud submission towards the infinite. Always you have been told that work is a curse and labor is a misfortune. But I say to you that when you work, you fulfill a part of earth's furthest dream, assigned to you when the dream was born. And in keeping yourself with labor, you are in truth loving life. And to love life through labor is to be intimate with life's inmost secret. Work is love made visible. And if you cannot work with love, but only with distaste, it is better that you should leave your work and sit at the gate of the temple and take alms of those who work with joy. For if you bake bread with indifference, you bake a bitter bread that feeds but man's half hunger. And if you grudge the crushing of grapes, your grudge distills a poison in the wine. And if you sing, though as angels, and love not the singing, you muffle man's ears to the voices of the day and the voices of the night. Sit and reflect on that. Do you love your work? And do you create a place where you lead by loving? You lead by loving what you're doing, okay? I'm going to end with this, folks. If I can get through this. We need a vision in the world, a vision that manages polarity. This is a story in April 4th, 1968. Some of you were around long enough to know what that date is. That's the day that Martin Luther King was assassinated. Bobby Kennedy was on his way to Indianapolis, campaigning for the next president of the United States. When he landed, now this is not the day of the internet. So when he landed in Indianapolis, he had learned of Martin Luther King's death. The people in Indianapolis did not know about this. And he was to address them as a candidate to promote himself in the next presidency. He threw away his speech, and is much to the chagrin of the speech writers. They said, don't deviate. And he found the back of a flatbed truck, and he addressed and he announced the death of Martin Luther King. And in his speech, and I would commend to you, if you want to hear a speech that integrates both sides of the war that was going on in America in the 1960s, go back and Google that speech in Indianapolis on April the 4th. Now, he spoke from his heart, and he spoke about his own suffering. 5 years earlier, his brother had been assassinated. And in that speech, he quoted Aeschylus, the great Greek dramatist. He who learns must suffer, and even in our sleep, pain that cannot forget falls drop by drop upon the heart, and in our own despair, against our will, comes wisdom to us by the awful grace of God. And then he presented a vision to the country. What we need now in the United States is not division. What we need now is in the United States is not violence or lawlessness, but love and wisdom and compassion toward one another, and the feeling of justice towards those who still suffer. Folks, 61 days later, Bobby Kennedy himself was assassinated. It is a risky business to stand up and stand for principles. But I'm very touched by this when I go back and remember, and maybe the message that was given to us in the 60s is now the message that needs to be redelivered to our world and our society today. What I know is today is that all we can do is do what's in front of us and to bring light to whatever darkness is around in our own life. And maybe it's in our families, maybe it's in our teams, maybe it's with the people that we serve. Whatever that looks like to you, I hope that I have planted a seed today to inspire you to bring more of yourself to the managing of the polarity within your work. Folks, I always say that there's a difference between horizontal growth and vertical growth. And horizontal growth is when we learn about leadership. But vertical growth is when we dig deeply and really invest in our own leadership development. And for those of you who, there's lots of webinars around, there's lots of podcasts around. I do my own, my daughter and I have a podcast. Many of you have listened in on it. This is a webinar where you've learned about leadership. But if you really want to invest in understanding and integrating this into your life, so it's not just a theory, I would encourage you to look up our SAGE program that supports people on an ongoing basis with their growth and development. I know we have some SAGE members in our community that will answer any questions that you have afterwards. Our next webinar is same time on Friday, March the 28th, Rise Above, Unleashing Potential Through the Power of Accountability, where we really use accountability as a tool to get more deeply into this work, so that it's not a hammer to punish us with, but it's actually a tool to inspire us with. And in 2 months, on Friday, April the 27th, I'm going to do a fundraising webinar on trauma, loss, and recovery, the long road home. And I'm going to speak to the, we're organizing with the town of Jasper as a fundraiser to send to their team up in Jasper. And so if anybody would like to join us for that, there's my logo there, the Caring Community Fund for the town of Jasper, one of my favorite places in the province, if not the country, to give back what they have gone through. So if anybody's interested in that, all of that information is now currently on my website. You can register for both and donate. Next month obviously is complimentary, but if you want to donate for fundraiser, a worthy cause, please join us in a couple of months. All right, folks, I'm going to stop sharing at this point.